political activist, independent journalist, blogger, and radio host, master of I Take Liberty with My Coffee.com, which you must visit. I Take Liberty with My Coffee.com. We have none other than El Señor Bobby Rodrigo. How are you doing, Señor Rodrigo?
I'm good, Egberto. How are you doing today? It's always nice to sit down with you, my friend.
Well, it's great to have you here. We have a whole lot to talk about, and actually, I'm going to make you kind of lead this part of the show because you've been a little bit more involved with what the journalist from Vox has been doing. I can't remember what's his name.
Actually, it was Glenn Greenwald.
Greenwald
actually had released a to give your audience a little background. So I guess it's now 4 or 5 days ago. The Intercept and Glenn Greenwald did a file dump, similar to what happened with the Snowden file dump. Very similar, actually.
Exactly.
It's actually just as big. And these are important because essentially you have a whistleblower, or in this case, multiple whistleblowers in a situation involving government behavior. So as is Greenwald's expertise, Scahill's expertise, one of the reasons why the Intercept was put together is they went and started to dissect the file dump on the basis of what was going on in Brazil, because there have been questions about a number of aspects. Because you had Brazil is interesting for a lot of reasons, but you had a president, a very, very popular president, that
Lula
was right, which had been termed limited out. And then, of course, at the next election, so there's a space. So actually, apparently, he could run again. So his popularity was immense. It wasn't even close. He was something like 70, 80%. He was going to win if he ran, bottom line. Mm-hmm. So there was what apparently at the time, and what they stated adamantly, an investigation into behavior by him that was alleged to be criminal. And ultimately, he was charged, convicted, and he is in prison right now. So there was a very famous now judge, I believe his name is Mauro, I want to say.
Mauro,
a very famous judge and a very famous prosecutor. And they became famous because of this case. And they insisted that they were remaining objective and honest, and had an integrity, and the information that they were investigating and that happened naturally in an investigation, and it was an honest exercise of their office. Well, unfortunately, that turns out not to be true. So, and
explain what happened, because I mean it just shows you how dirty things are, and I mean I see a lot of similarities, but go ahead.
Well, there's plenty of similarities. I mentioned that it was similar to Snowden's dump, and people need to realize this, particularly your audience, which is the majority of your audience, progressive, is Snowden's dump happened during Barack Obama's presidency. So what he was alleging that was happened, which all turned out to be true, happened during that thing. And this goes back to independence. Anyway, so focusing on Brazil, you have a situation where the prosecutor and the judge were not, in fact, acting as independent arms of a government, and they were acting in concert with a political agenda, and they are caught. And you have to understand that politically, there's not a lot of people that like Greenwald or journalists in general who decide to criticize, honestly, with facts, a particular party or person in a party, because of the way that we have shifted our journalism, presentation, argument, whatever. One of the reasons why Greenwald's not popular with the left is because he's criticized Barack Obama, and then now he's not so popular with the right because he criticizes Trump.
Bolsonaro.
And what they really are doing is they're criticizing, or actually they're shining a light on government behavior, regardless of who it is, which is what journalism is supposed to be. So on this particular case, staying on point, it has been revealed that this was actually a concerted effort by, you figure, this is two different arms of the government that was stopping a free election, essentially, in order for a political party or person to gain control of the government. And that in itself, it doesn't matter what party it is or what person it is, it's dishonest and it's unlawful. And so now you have even people on that side of the political agenda who have integrity are like, oh no, this is not going to work. Because what they're exposing is, I mean, they're literally exposing conversations that happen between the judge and the prosecutor, for example, in this particular thing. And mind you, I have not been able to read probably a tenth of the file dump. It's massive.
Let
It
me
takes
just stop
a long
you for a
time to
second
go
because
through it.
let me stop you for a second because what I want to present to the audience here is a lot of you may be asking, why are we talking about Brazil? Why are we talking about what's going on in Brazil? There are several reasons. Brazil is the largest economic power south of south of us, to put it bluntly,
Absolutely, South
and
America.
secondly.
Sure.
They have a lot of influence in Latin America, and we have somebody who is an illegitimate person who is holding office right there. That affects the entire, not only the entire hemisphere, it affects the world, especially since Brazil is a whole bunch of the Amazon and a whole lot of these things are within Brazil itself. And if we have a corrupt government, one that doesn't believe in the environment and so forth, like the one that we've generated here as well, that presents not only a problem for Brazil, but a problem for the United States. And what we're trying, the world actually, what we're trying to show here is how this type of corruption works. And later on, I'm going to kind of turn it over to here. But go ahead, Bobby. Please continue.
So, I'll give your audience another example. So, I sit on a number of committees for the American Bar Association, and one of them is a couple of tax committees. And every single year in Miami, there is a conference, the Latin American Tax Conference. And the entire Latin American community, starting with Mexico and going all the way down, brings their government representatives and their attorneys that work in that field, and they combine forces with international attorneys and United States, both government people and attorneys, to discuss tax policies that are relevant. So Brazil and Mexico, it wield the most influence on tax policy for the entire continent, or actually you got Central and
Central America and South America.
The entire Latin American community. They are the leaders of tax policy. And I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but to echo what you're saying, or to support what you're saying in the influence of Brazil, and then of course the Amazon is a big deal. It is probably it is the most important part of the ecosystem of the world, I would argue, and so would many climate people who are concerned. Just on the amount of forestation that's involved there, that balances carbon dioxide in the world. I mean, it is that big of a footprint. And so, yeah, it is. Brazil has immense power politically, and of course from the corruption side. I'll give an example that I use in this particular thing. So some years ago, I went and testified in front of the Albany Common Council about some legislation that an organization that I work with, People Against the NDAA, had written, and we had presented in Albany, and it was passed. So a bunch of people came together to do it. It was a great coalition of people, Veterans for Peace, from Veterans for Peace and Code Pink to the Tea Party, whatever. Right. So it was a great thing. So what I said that I like to highlight, because I had to make a political statement on something I shouldn't have, but in order to get the legislation passed, I thought it was tactically efficient. So I said, excuse me, that this particular law is one of the worst laws ever signed into law. And President Obama, he didn't pass it, but of course he signed it. So, and when he signed it, he said, I would never use it. And my testimony in front of the council said, because they would have probably used it against Martin Luther King, for example, or certainly Malcolm X, is Barack Obama is not going to be president for the rest of the time of the world. So, but he's passing on this power to whoever comes next. And here we are with whoever comes next. And we have a very good contrast, for example, on whoever comes next. And the executive of this country has always tried to expand its power. It's something that has always happened. And journalism is a combat against that. And more than the legislator, more than shining light on what happens in the courtroom, the executive, because it's such a dictatorship model by itself, when journalism is behaving properly, that's where the biggest light is shined on the basis of behavior, because they're executing laws. They're supposed to be executing the laws by the nature of the thing. So in that regard, I just want to point out how important it is for journalism to do that. And what happened in Brazil is just horrid. It's you're I mean, you're talking about a takeover of a country by a political
But it's
ideology.
deeper because what we also have is we have a political prisoner in Lula da Silva,
Yeah,
and
yes,
and in effect he is a political prisoner,
yes, he is all day
and
long.
in effect when Dilma Yousef was overthrown as well, that was a political issue. And the thing about it is why Americans should also be concerned about this isn't anathema to what could occur here in the United States with an autocratic type of Donald Trump. And I know a lot of people don't want to see the similarities in the way he has taken over the Supreme Court, in the way he has taken, and people talk a lot about the Supreme Court, but in the way this court is being stacked right now, which I think it's an important similarity that folks better be cognizant of. It happened in Brazil, a democracy. It can happen here. A lot of people want to discount it, but it can happen here.
Well, yeah, and you're right. The thing that I would push back against that is that it has been happening for a very long time. The interesting thing to me about the Donald Trump dynamic is that
Let
he's
me
doing
stop
a
you a
lot
second.
of,
Let me break because I want you to cater your answer with regards to the sentiment that I have that isn't this necessarily the sentiment of many progressives. I'm not talking about Russia. I'm not talking about Snowden. I'm not
no.
talking about any of those issues. I'm talking about just the modus operandi of Donald Trump and the way he feels about the executive and the powers of the executive. I don't think there has been a president, maybe inwardly, but that outwardly has shown so much disdain for institutions, that have shown so much disdain for the department of the different departments, the Department of Justice and all these other departments. I think people ought to be cognizant of that before they get too blasé about, oh, well, all the other presidents did it as well.
Well, and I agree and disagree to some degree. I mean, Nixon was horrid. I mean, Nixon went
Yes.
on television and said, "I can do it because I'm the president of the United States."
And,
You know,
and,
the
and
thing,
guess what? Donald Trump just did that with in
oh,
a
of
kind of
course.
a quasi manner with Stephanopoulos.
But when it comes to and so here's to me the difference. Donald Trump is just blunt about it and doesn't care that he's doing it and doesn't
True.
mind exposing it. I mean,
True.
to me that is the significant difference. But when you look at, for example, executive orders, no one wrote more executive orders than FDR ever.
True.
And you must remember that FDR put Japanese and Italian
In
and
internment
German Americans
camps.
in concentration camps.
Right.
You know, so and yet, as a progressive, for example, and not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying as a progressive, you have reasons to applaud some of FDR's things.
Let me stop you, Bobby. You are so right, Bobby. You are so absolutely right that progressives have a tendency to deny certain parts of our history with regards to somebody we consider progressive, especially if these are things that are dealing with race or other issues, because to the vast majority of progressives, well, it's just that little thing when it
Well,
isn't.
I would say to you that the parties do that in general. I mean,
All parties do that.
I
But
mean,
the reason
yeah,
I'm saying,
yeah.
the reason I hold that more against progressives is because what? We are progressives.
Good point. But you know me and the progressive thing. I don't believe that progressives today are true progressives unless they believe in peace first. Because
I
to
agree.
me,
And I'm with you
um,
there. I'm with you
yeah. I
there.
mean, I think it's I grew up in New York in the '60s, and in the '60s, and progressive politics was always about peace first, and then you went. I mean, no matter where you went, because peace solves so much. It pretty much solves everything when it gets right down to it. And we all know, particularly with the war on drugs and all the declassified documents, that Nixon went out of his way to stomp on the anti-war movement with the drug war. I mean, that was one of
Right.
the targets of it, for example. And you look at it's a great example on when you I have nicknames for everybody. So Saint Reagan, the conservative answer to JFK, and so they ignore the things that happened. I mean, Ronald Reagan is the reason I became an activist. I mean, when it comes right down to it, I mean, the stuff that I saw personally working for the man was horrid. So it's a party thing, and it goes right back to when you go to journalism. So when I was getting ready for the show, I was doing a little research, and just to remind myself on why I hate mainstream media, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at Tucker and Rachel, who pretty much are leading that aspect right now on cable television. Well, from a journalist standpoint, Rachel has absolutely no cred in the journalistic world, in her history. I mean, all you have to do is look her up. She has no cred as a journalist. Doesn't mean she's lying. That's not what the point is. The point is, and same thing with Tucker. Now, Tucker has a little bit, but these people
Let me stop you there. I know I understand what you mean by cred, but explain to my audience, because that statement on its own right could be taken incorrectly.
Sure, right, and I agree with right. So let me elaborate a little bit. So what a journalist to me is like, for example, well, Scahill is a great example, or Taibbi or somebody. They get into the weeds. They do the work themselves. Boots on the ground. I go when Nazis come to town. I go say hi, and I bring my camera.
We do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then people will try and say, well, you must like Nazis. If that's why you think that I'm doing that, then you're being political and you're not looking at what I'm doing. Rachel's never been on the ground. Rachel's never been somewhere and did a story about it, wrote stories about it. That doesn't mean she's lying or anything. But the point is that she doesn't have the chops of a journalist. Richard Engel does. Richard Engel is a war correspondent, has been there, for example. Matt Taibbi walked the halls and did all the research when he exposed.
And there's that young woman from TYT as well. Young woman, what's her name? You know who I'm talking about.
I do. We actually, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, the thing about it is that you have, when we look at mainstream media, the majority of, and you mentioned this at the beginning of your show on how, like, we're talking about a cough. They isolate 2 or 3 stories, and then they spend the entire time telling us how we should think about these stories, whether it's right, left, or whatever, instead of the Edward R. Murrow thing. And for those who are younger, Edward R. Murrow is the standard for journalism from broadcast standpoint. He would tell you the stories all day, and then at the end he would give you an opinion. I got no problems with opinions. Your opinion I value. I know where it's coming from. You're a good man. I may not agree with it, but I get it. It's not like you're trying to be evil, right? It's an opinion. But at the same time, can we at least agree what the facts are? It goes back to the Rodney King video for me. How can you look at that video and not see the same thing? But that's the way we formed it. That's how they walked away from being convicted.
But that
right?
is, I think that's what, starting from the Powell Manifesto and other documents, that is what we've taught people to do. We've taught people to have somebody else think for you. Now, in my shows, I'm very opinionated, but I try to tell people, don't take me at face value. Later on, when you've gotten enough trust in me, you can, because I know what I do. You know what you do. When you tell me something, Bobby, you and I disagree on quite a bit. But if you tell me something in general, I don't have to look it up, because I know you're going to tell me the facts about it.
Our agreements are more about you want to advocate while and I really want to be able to trust people a little bit more, and I totally get it. It's not, there's really no right or wrong here.
And you know what, Bobby? Let me tell you something, and I really understand. You come up here and you talk about Edward R. Murrow and you talk about Cronkite and all these guys, right? And that was the patriarchal type of journalism, and I know that is what a lot of people still want. Unfortunately, I don't think that is the world we are in.
It's not. But remember, 24-hour news cycle changed that. I mean, when Reagan was inaugurated was when CNN was launched. Yes. And everything now is about who's first and most of our media, mainstream or otherwise, the New York Times, Washington Post, everybody. Well, if you really read their stuff, I watch zero television news. I don't care who it is. I'll watch videos of stuff. But I read everything. Now, when you have what they're doing is they're saying, the New York Times reported, the Hill reported, the Washington Post reported. Nobody's doing their own work. When I was doing the work with Puerto Rico, totally to me it reminded me of this while I was in that deep hole that I was in. So we're getting ready to fly over to Puerto Rico in a private plane, and we're doing a doctor to doctor transport of medical supplies. The plane was actually paid for by Ellen DeGeneres, She gave a $54,000 check to Bethany Frankel, who was my partner on the thing, et cetera, et cetera. So it was $18,000 plane. So I had to invite ABC News Miami to go on the plane in order for them to do an accurate report, because they wouldn't pay for it to go over there themselves and do it.
Right.
I mean, and now this is before anybody was reporting deaths. And in this report, they interviewed doctors on the runway outside the plane that I brought them on. And that doctor said there was a lot of people dead. I saw them myself. And they never went and did this on myself. It's mind-boggling to me how much they don't do on the ground. It's almost like a lazy profession, though it's different. It's a lot of reasons that
Right,
that
but let me kind of add a corollary to what you're saying there, because I agree with all that you're saying. Now, as far as my reporting is concerned, I'm going to look at Scahill, I'm going to look at all these guys, and I'm going to put it together, and I'm going to try to filter it as well. The original reporting I do is whenever we do activism work, or tomorrow I'm going to interview somebody on social on criminal justice who was a woman who was in jail for a while, and we're going to that is going to be all original. But one of the things that I want to tell you is, I mean, you say you don't watch TV, right? Believe it or not, I want you to start watching TV.
No,
let me tell you
hell
why.
no.
Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. Because I have several computers here, and I have one computer connected to a machine a little computer system that can pipe several channels in at the same time. And the reason I do that, Bobby, is the following. If I'm going to talk to the audience, right, I need to know what it is that's actually framing them. What is it that's actually talking to them? And because I understand what's talking to them, I can better do it. And that's why I said, when I come to you and I get information from you, I know it's right down the right. I know it's factual. I know that. I don't know how you can relate directly to an audience
I just do it. So I guess my answer to that is that, first of all, I read everything that you see.
Right.
So while they still do plenty of opinion, it cuts out a lot of the noise. I don't have time to listen to, or actually, it's not even about time. I don't have a desire to listen to all these so-called experts.
I think you're going to have to develop that desire, brother, because to be
No,
more
hell
effective.
No, because all I want to do is tell the truth to the audience.
I know.
And that's all I care about. And I
know. And you do that. And you do that.
I know. Independent media. So a couple of things. So independent media, first of all, doesn't have the finances to go out there and do all of this on the ground. So we have to read other people's stuff.
Exactly.
Without question. I can't watch. I mean, I can't even watch Chris Matthews anymore. He's lost his mind, and he's a real jourналist. That man has got a serious history. I mean, Chris Matthews is got.
Chris, I didn't say that, Chris. I still like you, Chris.
He's lost his mind. I'm sorry. But like, for example, when you look at these shows, Chris Wallace and Chris Matthews have the most the most experience and real journalists on the ground politically. Since the early '60s, they've been doing this. And yet they both. I mean, Wallace is kind of still a little balanced, but Matthews has lost his mind. He all he does is talk about politics, and you need to do things this way. That's fine. I cannot deal with that.
But what I'm saying, Bobby, what happened? Bobby,
yes.
What I'm saying though is,
you shaved your head this morning. That's all I care about. Just tell me you shaved it.
I did shave my head this morning.
So don't tell me that it has to be shiny. Just tell me that you shaved it, and I'll report that you shaved it.
I shaved it. And the reason it is shiny is that I have oily skin. But anyway.
But I don't have to tell people Egberto shaved his head and you have to like it because I just want to tell him that you shaved your head. There should be nothing wrong with that.
I got it. Let me tell you where let me tell you where I think we divide. You are a journalist for me. In other words, I will learn certain things that I would not otherwise had known from reading your stuff. Okay? I have to listen, but I think of myself more as an interface between reality and what people are listening and what's programming or tempering people. And I think you have to have that person there because, again, if you don't understand why a lot of people that worship Rachel have the point of view that they have, or a lot of the people that the other guy that you mentioned on
Hunter.
Fox News,
Please
the crazy.
don't watch him. I'm just making an example.
I do watch him every so often.
Oh.
I
So
do.
so let me give you another example. So recently, YouTube did a purge, similar to what Facebook did
Yes.
on journalists. Okay, and one of the journalists that was impacted was somebody we both know, who I know very well, Ford Fisher of News to Share.
Right.
Now, so Ford Fisher is a young man who owns this organization called News to Share, and that's with the number 2. And I'll plug him because he's a phenomenal human being. I've been on the ground with him. I've worked with him a long time. Coffee parties, worked with him, etc. And Spike Lee has purchased his footage to put into the Black Klansman because he was in Charlottesville. So what Ford does, and he's actually somebody I've actually visited Nazis with to say hello. What Ford does is his whole program is based on raw footage. He offers nothing but the raw footage. He goes somewhere and shows everybody this is what's happening in your society right now, live. What do you think? Nothing else. There's nothing wrong with that. And yet, he's being censored as somebody who shows an extremist view of things. And yet, his documenting of the extremist views is something that we need in this society to show people how bad it is. And I've listened and I've read comments about his work that is just, another thing that I can't stand doing that I have to do sometimes is reading the comment section of a post. And I learned this a long time ago, reading an old AOL post that was done because people were complaining about not being allowed to clap at a graduation, and it went right off the cliff. And I'm like, I should not read comments because they make you sick. I mean, people are just hateful behind the computer. And I'm like, I don't need this in my life. I just want to show and whatever. But the thing that's happening with Ford, and this is why and again, YouTube is a private company. They don't want to do it, fine. But we need to be mindful of the things that are out there that are telling us the truth. I could give you a list of things that I read based upon the trust issue that you said, and none of them is going to be Rachel or Tucker or, our whole list of people, because I don't want views. I want the truth. Now, I'll give Rachel her props when it comes to Iraq, but at the same time, when Iraq came around, the drumbeats of war was pounded by the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, and they all said it was real and it was honest.
They all did, even the progressives.
And anybody, including me, who spoke out against it, I was unpatriotic and anti-American. I lost a cousin in 9/11. You can kiss my unpatriotic ass, basically, because I'm sorry, people, but I was furious at 9/11 too. But I didn't believe that we should have the Patriot Act. Give me a break. Or we should go to Iraq for something that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, not even a little bit. And yet here we were doing our drumbeats of war, and it wasn't the first time we've seen it. And yet everybody jumped on board just like they do now, just like they did with Syria. Where was the left? Where was the left? The progressive show that we're on. Where was the left when Barack Obama went back on his campaign promise? He ran on constitutional government. That was his biggest thing. That's why I call him Mr. Potential. That's my nickname for Barack. He said he was going to stop drones. He was going to stop surveillance. He said it. That was what he said. That's why he said George Bush shouldn't be that kind of presidency. And when he got to be president, he expanded both, and the drone thing went out. Oh my God.
Well, Bobby, I don't know. I've been preaching. You know me for over a decade, and I've been telling you that you have to remember the difference between the president and the presidency.
Man, I hate when you say that.
I know. It's true, though.
Look, when I took my oath of office, when I took my oath to wear a uniform, you don't get a break, okay? Everybody who takes that, it's like the police stuff that's going on. Look, if you don't want to, I got to get home safe. Look, if you don't want to follow your oath of office, go get a job at a bank. Okay, I'm sorry. All these elected officials, they do their oath and they say that they're going to uphold the Constitution or whatever, and they don't do it. And I don't care if it's the president. It doesn't matter. Just can't give me 5 minutes of people doing what they're supposed to be doing, and watch how it changes. That's my.
I think that is noble. I was a person that believed in that sort of thing in the past. Now I've understood that there's a thing called the president, there's a thing called the presidency, there's a thing called the plutocracy that you hear me rake out about all the while. Until we get rid of a plutocracy, because I don't know if you read some of the stuff that I wrote over the weekend about, it is really, people like to talk about government being bad. You're an anti-government kind of a guy. You are more, yeah, you are.
No,
But I
that's
mean,
not true. I'm not.
okay.
I'm not.
Well,
Let me tell you what I
you're
am.
a freedom guy and whenever you hear,
let me tell you
go
what
ahead.
I am. I want the government to deliver the public benefits to the people that it's supposed to. That's what I want. And the data says that it doesn't. So I look for solutions to who does it best. And if the government isn't doing something better, then maybe it shouldn't be at the government. I want whatever the solution is best. I don't care where it's coming from.
My brother, I have to go to the next segment, but I'd like you back on again for us to talk about just that, because I just thought about that. You and I never came on air and spoke about why I believe you're anti-government and why you think you're not. So we should have a show on that.
I'm about
sometime.
liberty. But you know who you should have on the show in all seriousness to want to talk about the public benefits delivery? You should have Dan on the show.
Dan Johnson?
I mean, We Do Better. The model for We Do Better is the bomb.
I went to your conference.
Fantastic.
I went to your
Well, I know you
conference
did.
in what
I know.
city?
I know.
Where was that? Arizona?
We
Where
did. The law is based upon Arizona. We had presentations at Netroots Nation, as you
Yeah.
know, right? I mean, We Do Better is around. It's an organization I helped found. I'm no longer with them, but I support the model. I live the model. That's why we
Right.
did it. And it's something worth doing just to discuss why.
And
really.
I have a lot of respect for what you guys have done at We Do Better or Do Better, whatever it's called.
We do better. We do better.
We Do Better. I have a
And
lot.
remind you, We Do Better is about you and me and everybody.
And I have a T-shirt to prove it.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
But Bobby, let me tell you, give me a closer on Brazil, and then I got to get to my next segment. But I'd like you to do a closer on Brazil for me.
Well, yeah. The thing about the closer is basically everybody is please listen, read, learn on how essentially government corruption happens. I mean, this is cold, hard facts in its rawest form. I don't expect people to go into, get on, do a WikiLeaks thing, like also is very relevant, to do that kind of research. So, that's journalist work. But if you just watch the Glenn Greenwald video, it's posted on the Coffee Party USA page, the Facebook page. It's on YouTube. Just look up Glenn Greenwald in Brazil. And it's about 10 minutes long, and just follow the trail and you will see how government corruption works and how it can impact. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of people being impacted here. It's crazy. And demand integrity and accountability, and don't let anybody shut down journalism. Do not let any president, any elected official, any pundit on mainstream media shut down independent or any kind of journalism that's telling the truth, because we need it. It's essential to a free society.
Well, my brother, El Señor Bobby Rodrigo, it's
Always
been
a pleasure.
But anyway, you have a wonderful day. Thank you so kindly for having been here, and we'll do this again soon. Folks, that is Bobby Rodrigo, political activist, independent journalist, blogger, radio show host, and he is the editor and the owner of ITakeLibertyWithMyCoffee.com. That is ITakeLibertyWithMyCoffee.com. Be well.